Friends, I'm at my wit's end. Is it time to hang up my thimble? Last night I basted on my collar piece once more just to check everything was looking peachy, what with all the changes I wanted to make to my neckline, but everything was not looking peachy. There's no time now to explain, but suffice to say that after countless hours of fiddling, I think I might have cracked it. Have I? Let's see. Off we go. Okay, well now there's time to explain. So when I was sewing the shoulder seams, I somehow misaligned the front and the back panels such that the back panel was nearer my actual neckline than the front panels. In other words, the actual shoulder seam on the back panel was left being longer than the front panel. There was a little bit hanging out. Just going to sew these together. Now, you may remember in the last episode, I said I wanted to lower the neckline. So I think it's a pretty simple fix. I think all I need to do is just scoop down the back neckline, again, just half a centimetre or so. And for whatever reason, when I was doing that, allowing for whatever difference I'd made with the shoulder seams, it reintroduced something which honestly was my nemesis, namely the shoulder creases that were in the last jacket I sewed with this pattern. I guess a quick word on what I'm doing. This is my collar piece. You've seen that before. That's the collar linen. And this is a collar melton. This is like a kind of felted wool that is going to form the undercollar. And if you have a suit jacket, if you turn up the collar, you'll probably see something like this on the underside. So this has no seam allowance. This has a bit of seam allowance around the edges. It doesn't really necessarily matter how much it's going to get cut away, but I just need to attach these two together now. And I think you know how I'm going to do it. Anyhow, so with my lowering the neckline, the shoulder seams being out of whack, the shoulder creases returned, I was absolutely distraught because this was like the one thing that I really wanted to I say distraught, you know, I was a bit bummed. This is the one thing I really wanted to eradicate in this jacket. Now, I know what the problem in theory was supposed to be. I know what causes those shoulder creases in theory, but for some reason I refuse to believe that that could be the case. So I spent ages faffing around, readjusting the neckline, reattaching the collar, moving it around, bish bash bosh. And then I remembered, look, just open up the shoulder seams at the neckline a tiny little bit, let it resettle, see where it wants to sit on your shoulders. And lo and behold, those shoulder seams parted about 1 centimetre each, and I knew what I had to do. So I've opened up my shoulder seams basically by 1 centimetre at the neckline and tapered that back into the shoulder seam that I'd already sewn. And then I also let it out probably by about another centimetre at the centre back seam as well, which also had the effect of helping reduce those ripples at the back of the neck, which was probably the main takeaway from the fitting in the last episode that I thought was going to be the big problem. Anyway, so I think I've roughly fixed it. I'm still not 100% happy, but I think I'm just going to go ahead with the collar now and just see what I can get out of it. Okay then, story time's over. Right, so again, we've got our collar linen, we've got the wool melton, and the last piece for the undercollar is going to be these two little pieces of pocketing, which I'm just going to slot in there. I'll trim those to fit later on. So 2 halves cut with the pattern on each, sewn together at the middles, at the backs, whatever, the centres, placed on top of each other wrong sides facing, and then I'm just slotting these pocketing pieces here. These are just covering about half of each panel on the edges. Again, just adding a bit of structure, a bit of shape. First things first, place together. The collar overall is going to consist of basically 2 parts, the undercollar, which is what I'm making first, and then the top collar, which will just come from this piece of garment fabric, but we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, I really was a little bit rattled by this whole shoulder crease thing yesterday. If I'd been really conscientious, I would have tried fitting the collar again with the new neckline that I was aiming for after having done that first fitting in the last week's episode, but I thought, nah, it will work out. But as it happened, I needed to make changes to the shoulder seams. Ideally, that would have been done before the shoulder pads went in. Thankfully, I was able to do it by hand, and more or less, no harm, no foul, but, you know, just bad practice for me. But hey, no one's paying me, not my problem. And look what I've done. Some people really do just love the sound of their own voice, don't they? I think you'll be as excited as I was to hear that the next thing we're going to do is some more pad stitching, and not just some, a fair amount. So we're going to do it in this semicircular pattern. And I think with these 2 pieces, with the collar linen and the wool melton, is that they're both cut on the bias actually. And I talked about the bias in the last episode where it's cutting at an angle between the 2 grains. And again, that just gives it flexibility because we're going to steam work this in a little while. And we just want to pad stitch in a sort of round fashion because that's just going to help accommodate the bias of it. I'm going to start by doing it in a little semicircle around there and then just sort of on each side vaguely matching that same pattern. So again, you're using your fabric matching thread, or in this case, rather a thread of a colour that matches the melton. In my case, it's just black, 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 sticking with a black silk finishing thread. And because these, in theory, are going to show on the underside, kind of like the underside of the lapel, so, you know, you don't want to be taking huge, chunky stitches, but it's also not the end of the world because this, of course, is going to be folded under. And so in theory, I'm covering the entirety of the collar linen because that, again, no seam allowance, that is corresponding to the exact shape of the collar. Although I am leaving just a couple of millimetres at both the top and the bottom because that is actually going to get trimmed away a little bit as well. But we'll see about that in a second.
So yeah, come around the edge of the semicircle here. I'm just going to go across and continue. With pad stitching, the length of the stitch that you use kind of determines how firmly the two pieces you're attaching to each other are attached to each other. The last time I did this, I was using really tiny stitches. It took forever, and I promise I'm not increasing the size of these just out of pure laziness, although that is certainly a factor. These are on the bias. They're meant to have a certain fluidity. A slightly longer stitch is not going to be the end of the world. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure there might be a tailor, an actual tailor, proper tailor, a professional watching this who will tell me I'm talking out of my tush. You can't stop me. I think in the past, when I've had little setbacks like this shoulder crease thing yesterday, I've really kind of struggled to keep it in perspective maybe, and basically just had real strops about it. And I think, I don't know, it was actually kind of good yesterday to be met with the same problem that I'd experienced the last time, the very problem I'd wanted to avoid, and yet to sort of realise eventually, actually no, due to having experienced this problem once, I did take the trouble to work out what exactly causes it. I do now know how to tackle it. And yeah, it also occurred to me it was an occasion to reflect that I put a lot of my time into teaching myself how to do this now. And while, of course, there are still issues lying in the road every single time I do it, there are little hurdles I have to overcome. And sometimes they are the ones I'm not expecting, the ones I think I've already conquered. Even allowing for that, this jacket is still a step beyond in quality than the last one I made, as that one was a step beyond the one of the first one I made. It's not about blowing my own trumpet or anything. It's just about to sort of just emphasize the value, whatever the projects are that you're working on. Just sort of remind yourself that you are always learning, and kind of you should give yourself credit for what you've achieved. You should give yourself credit for having gotten yourself to the point where you can understand better the mistakes you're making, and maybe thereby in the moment be more frustrated by them, but eventually you'll actually come out on the other side and be like, no, okay, at least I knew how to solve that problem. I didn't like that there was the problem, but I knew how to solve it, and I did. Ain't she pretty? All right, so we've got that central semicircle done. I'm just going to start here and now work across towards the end, and then on the other side too. Big talk from me about this jacket being better than the last one. I haven't even gotten around to the sleeves yet. I haven't even cut them. I did realise as well, I do need to lower the armhole even more. It's still a little bit too tight. Just can't win this week. So now that I'm towards the last sort of 5 or so centimetres of this, I'm just gonna continue with the collar rolled over like this. And this is kind of like, we did this with the lapel, if you recall. And again, this is all kind of bias stuff. It's all quite movable and changeable. It's all amenable to being transformed. And yeah, and this is just gonna make sure that the collar tips, and again, these are the bits that are gonna meet the lapel, are just gonna lie flat, not curve upwards, basically. Onto the next side. Always so sad when you're like 5 centimeters short on the thread you need to finish what you're doing. Well, worst things happen at sea. All right, first things first, I'm just going to press this flat from the linen side, which you're looking at here. And that's what we're looking at. So comparing this to my pattern, I can see that that collar fold line hasn't really moved. So I'm just going to chalk mark it on again to make sure it's clear. Yeah, I mean, I also wonder if all the bullying that I've put this collar linen piece through, if basically it's kind of lost its spark, as it were, for the sort of ironworking that will come in a little while. But I have faith. And so that I'll have the benefit of seeing that fold line marked on the collar Melton side as well, I'm just going to baste along the line from this side. Oh my goodness, just wait until you see the basting situation currently around my neckline on the garment. It's a real hoot. I sort of lost my mind a little bit yesterday, if I hadn't lost it already. We've got now some trimming to do using my famously blunt fabric shears. And yeah, we're just going to trim away all of this seam allowance around here, just trimming around the shape of the collar linen, like so. Oh, this is nerve-wracking. I don't really know why. Well, probably because I almost chopped the whole garment in half last week, but a slightly simpler proposition, I hope. Ooh. Okie dokie, that's your collar. Or is it? If you remember, I pad stitched a little bit in from the top and the bottom edges, and just from the collar linen, not the Melton, absolutely not the Melton, please, for the love of God, not the Melton. I'm just going to try and trim a couple of millimeters off the top and the bottom edges, just so that the Melton can cover up this raw edge of collar linen so it's not showing. Yeah, if anyone wants to remind me in the comments to sharpen my fabric shears before next week, I'd be grateful. Job done. All right, so I've got my collar piece, and now it's time to press it into shape and make good on all this bias, blah, 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 that I've been talking about. So I'm going to fold it along where the fold line is going to be, and I'm just going to baste that in place temporarily while I do what I'm going to do with the iron. Because what happens is every person has different shapes to their shoulders, right? I have quite sloped shoulders. Some people might have quite square shoulders. Some people have quite normal shoulders. And what I need to do is iron a curve into this shape that I'm creating, into this collar in its current form. So flatten out this folded edge, but while doing so, shape it into more or less of an arc, basically. The squarer the shoulders, the more curved the arc needs to be. The sloped, the less curved it needs to be. And then normal would be somewhere in the middle. So I don't need to shape it a ton because I have relatively sloped shoulders, not super slopey, but slopey enough. I'll show you in a second on the ironing board just exactly what I mean. So I've got a bit of steam as well going in the iron. So first I'm just going to press it like normal. And then I'm just going to try and manipulate it as I'm pressing it using steam into this curved shape. So again, we've got wool here, we've got linen cut on the bias. Everything should be nice and amenable to that kind of transformation. And you can see there, that's kind of taken on this more curved shape. And let's use our ruler here. For someone with my shoulders, sloped shoulders, you probably want this arc to be about 1.5 inches deep, so maybe like 3 to 4 centimeters. This is a 5 centimeter ruler. I think I've just about nailed that. I'm going to open the collar up again. Yeah, that's nice and sharply folded now, but this is too sharp around here at the ends. So just a couple of inches in. So, you know, sort of 4 or 5 centimeters in, I'm just going to flatten that out again. Not like completely, but just so it's not this really sharp fold that we have in the middle there. There we have it, something like that. Time to baste it to the jacket. Yeah, kind of basting carnage around here. But what I did yesterday after all my trials and tribulations was mark stitch, not super clearly, but mark stitch nonetheless, the line that I was going to follow, essentially the new neckline. And I'm just going to baste collar on, according to that line, working from the centre back seam round to the collar edges. Oh, folks, I'm not having fun here. Got no idea how this is going to turn out, but we'll do a fateful fit check in a minute and see what's going on. Okay, well, it's touch and go, but I think it just about works. I'll let you guys be the judge in a little while when we do a small fit check once I put on the top collar and yeah, basically finish the job. So a bit of a point of no return now for someone as lazy as me, just cross-stitching through this neckline seam allowance, fixing the collar piece into place, into the position I basted it in. I think what I've realised is that with the changes I've made to the shape of the neckline, I really would have needed to have actually altered the shape of the collar itself. I was thinking just purely about the length and making sure that matched up. But I can feel now that it's the shape and the curves that are now mismatched a little bit. But honestly, I'm just going to cut my losses. I think I'm happy with how it's fitting around the shoulders now and around the neck. Actually, yeah, I'm really happy with how it's fitting around the neck pretty much. Again, I'll let you guys be the judge. Cometh the hour, by which point, of course, it might be too late. I'm using the bottom edge of the Melton, which I can feel on the other side as a guide. You know, ideally, these should just be little pricks on the far side. I think I'm past caring, especially because it's going to be black thread showing on black Melton, which in any case will be folded over at all times because I'm not the kind of person to wander around wearing a suit with the collar popped. Indeed, I don't know if such animals truly exist on this earth. I mean, this whole saga really with the neckline, the shoulder seams, the collar, I mean, it's a pretty literal illustration of the old stitch in time saves 9 kind of adagio. For one reason or another, I mean, you know, I give myself 1 day a week basically to do these videos, and I guess that makes me rush a little bit sometimes, but realistically, it's just in my nature to be overly optimistic and overly bullish about how well things are going. I ultimately feel like I've managed to weather the storm, but I think if I'd properly taken the time, checked the theories that arose after the fitting I did in the last episode, rather than just assuming they were correct, I might have avoided some of the head and indeed heartache that I've endured over the last 24 hours. You know, it just reminds you of the value of putting in all this time in the first place, but also how much you can devalue that time by being in a random hurry for no particular reason. If anyone else has any sort of tailoring or even just general sewing horror stories they'd like to share in the comments, help me feel better, do me a favour. Off to the top collar. One last insult. Maybe I'm the problem. So with the top collar, it's one piece cut on the fold, and I basically left sort of 1.5 inches or so, just a few centimetres excess all around, and you'll see why. So I'm just going to attach these together. I think you know what I'm going to use to do so. It's definitely going to make my life easier if I chalk this or this, some rough version of this on. It'll do. So this is the wrong side of the top collar, facing the wrong side of the undercollar. Line up the centres, line them up as well as you can. Basting across the gauge line first, and then I'm following the roll line. So that's just basted along there. And now a little bit in from the undercollar edge, I'm just basting along the top. Again, just trying to keep everything laying flat on the table so that it stays in position. Hopefully once this step's done, we won't really have to worry about that so much. You can just really feel how much this is trying my patience. But I know, or at least I hope, the payoff at the end will be a big one. Let's just flip that over and you can see now that's going to be the top collar. And what you need now is just to trim away this excess. So we want to leave about 1 centimetre of top collar hanging out above the undercollar and about 2.5 centimetres here sticking out beyond this collar edge. Yoink! Where in tarnation is my basting needle? Oh, there it is. Where it's supposed to be, on the floor. So what I'm doing now is just kind of getting the top collar edge in position as it will be, and I'm basting it in place. You see here that 1 centimetre seam allowance that we left on top, I'm folding it underneath, tucking it away, and I'm just leaving sort of a couple, sort of 2-3 millimetres poking out beyond the edge there, just so, because obviously when that's folded over, that top collar piece, which is garment fabric, will be adequately covering the edge of the undercollar, and that'll just make for a really nice looking collar edge at the back. You can already see that's starting to come together. You know, I confess, I feel a little bit guilty. You know, I've been really whinging about collars and stuff today, bearing in mind that literally everything I've had to whinge about has been purely my own fault. This is actually, assuming everything's going to plan, one of my favourite parts of the construction. I actually really enjoy these sort of successive phases of basting on the collar and folding everything over and just really piece by piece seeing it become what it's going to be. And then of course, you know, by the time you get to the end of this stage, you're really at the point where you've got kind of an almost finished jacket, but for whacking a few sleeves on. And what could be so difficult about that? I take back everything I've said. Collars are great. Collars are fun. You should do one sometime. Yeah, and you see, it's a nice collar edge. Okay, we're now going to do something similar on the inside. So as you can see, that's kind of the gauge line of the lapel. So we just need to clear this up. I've got that basting there quite near to the gauge line. So I'm just going to snip this such that I will be able to fold it under, much in the manner I've just done with the top of the collar. I know I'm talking like a Victorian governess. Yeah, I'm just going to baste that in place, and I'm only going to go as far as the shoulder seam, and then I'm just going to leave it for now. So you can see now this sort of canvas stuff that was open around the facing is just about going to get covered. There wouldn't be any just about it if I hadn't trimmed away so much. What was I saying a minute ago about loving making collars, actually? I think I'm going to edit that out. This side's slightly less eventful. Maybe I do love making collars. Oh, another basting stitch? That's right. Just along back of the undercollar, underneath the roll line or the fold line. Just going through all layers, including the top collar underneath. Again, just further securing that in place from shoulder seam to shoulder seam. It's a lot of fun getting all these stitches out, isn't it? So just here, this is that flap around the actual back of the neck that I left sort of unbasted here. And what I'm going to do very lightly is just snip a few snips. I'm doing quite shallow here because with all the neckline stuff that I've had, I'm a bit anxious about how my lining and stuff is going to fold up. I don't want these sort of showing through. But you know, realistically, I should have had more clearance there to do rather larger slips. But it's kind of a stretchy fabric anyway, to be honest. So just at the level of the neckline of the undercollar, which I can feel with my finger, I'm just going to baste through only using silk finishing thread. This, in theory, is going to get covered by the lining. And if it doesn't, well, then I've messed up. Okay, so I've actually undone the lining, the back lining's shoulder seams there, just to give me the maneuverability I need. But what I'm doing now, so I've folded up the top of the back lining at the neckline, folded under the seam allowance just so it covers that silk stitch base I did. And now I'm just prick stitching this finally in place, wishing I'd never been born. You know, you win some, you lose some. This has definitely been the most, I think, problematic construction of a collar that I've ever done. As it turned out in the last jacket, I just didn't realise how problematic what I'd constructed was until it was too late. But, you know, sometimes ignorance is bliss, isn't it? It's not the worst prick stitch I've ever done. Indeed, sadly, it might be the best. So it's now time to take care of these little floppy bits. I'm just going to fold these excess bits round, press them with that little fold, and then they're going to get folded over like that. So again, using my black silk thread, I'm cross-stitching these little flappy bits. And then I think it's time for a little fit check.
I'll take it. It'll do. As you can see, there's still some weird stuff going on around the shoulders and around the back of the neck. I wish it weren't the case, but it's still a lot better than it was yesterday. And I think it's just about within the realm of acceptability. It's also better than it was on the previous jacket I made. So baby steps. I also hope that if I scoop even more out of the armhole, there won't be as much pulling when I move my arms on or through that sort of shoulder point, and maybe that'll have a slight effect as well. I like actually generally how the collar is sitting on the neck. It's high up on the shirt collar, it's tight to the shirt collar. It's possibly a little bit too tight. That might still be why there are these ripples. If it is borderline, it's just on the wrong side of the borderline, but again, I am lazy, I am in denial. There would be a correct way to make this work if I really wanted to undo the last couple of weeks. I say the last couple of weeks, you know, maybe go back and start from the shoulders again. I just don't know if I have the will. I'm sorry, you've got to forgive me. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with how the collar's been put together. I think I've done a decent job. I'm happy given the compromises I've had to make over the last 24 to 36 hours. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. Just, you know, let me know what's on your mind. Really anything at this point. I'm barely even here anymore. Chalk it up to the game. We live and learn, we go again.
So that's kind of it then. You can see it sort of in its finished form. It's not finished, obviously. There's just a few steps now to properly close things off. So starting back where we left off, we're just going to slip stitch these edges of those little folded under tabs into the collar melton. And then while we're slip stitching, we're also just going to slip stitch the bottom edge of the undercollar into the garment fabric around the neckline. Everything's already exactly in the position it will be, but obviously eventually these basting stitches have to come out, so might as well get ahead now. If you wanted, you could do this right at the very, very, very end of the construction, you know, when we do all the finishing. I tend to just do it now. And while we're messing around with the edges of collars, we're going to slip stitch the top edge of the top collar to the top edge of the undercollar. So remember, the top collar is just peeking over by a couple of millimeters, and this is just going to really fuse them nicely into one crisp edge. On the inside, we're just going to slip stitch the top collar down into the facing as well. Go nice and subtle. And then lastly, but by no means leastly, when we get to our gorge line, we're going to ladder stitch. If you imagine the gorge line as basically kind of like a canyon with two walls and a sort of deep ravine in the middle, and you're taking your needle and you're going down into the canyon and you're scraping the needle horizontally across, you're picking up some of that rock face and then you're hopping over to the other side of the canyon, doing the same over there, and you're kind of crisscrossing so that you're kind of easing that canyon shut with the tension of the thread being pulled in between. Next week, we're moving on to pretty much the final boss battle of this whole experience, which is the sleeves. I really appreciate you watching. If you've taken any satisfaction from this video, be it educational, sadistic, really anything at all, please do consider giving it a like. If you're not on board already for this kind of content, you can always subscribe, as I'm sure you know. There are plenty more like it. There's already a decent amount like it. And on that note, if you're joining the wedding suit journey for the first time, you can click here for episode 1, or else if it's next week, the next episode. And if you fancy starting your own tailoring project, but you're not sure how or where to start, you can click here and I'll give you the lowdown. Till then, have a good one.